So, hi everyone, and thank you for coming. I hope you had a great conference so far and enjoy the rest of the conference. So today we're going to talk about basically attack paths or understanding how different vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in your cloud environment and in on-prem can actually create risk and expose your environment. So from the people that are standing here or outside, how many of you have actually heard about the concept of attack path and understand what it is? So I assume very little, but all of you have heard about vulnerabilities. So we all know we have vulnerabilities in our environment, but the main thing to remember is that an attack is not just a single vulnerability. Attackers are not coming to our environment saying, "Oh, you have this nice vulnerability. That's it. That's all I need." Well, unless it's an exposed S3 bucket, that's all they need. They don't need more than that. But in the end, attack paths are actually combining various issues in order to perform those escalations paths so attackers can actually reach the critical assets, the things that matter most for the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about attack path management, what it is. We're going to give a few examples that we've actually seen from actual customers, and then we're going to talk about how that is help prioritize your remediation. So what is an attack path? So let's assume that there is some critical assets, maybe an S3 bucket, maybe some database that I have with important data, and I want to try and understand what is the risk. Can an attacker actually reach it? So an attack path is basically starting from a potential breach point, maybe an exposed server, understanding that there is maybe a firewall with an open port that could lead to a vulnerability that would be exploited on some virtual machine that will allow the attacker to compromise it. But obviously that's not the end. When an attacker actually reached that EC2, he compromises it. Okay, what's next? How do I actually pivot and reach that database with all the PCI data and my important stuff? So from that, you can actually go and maybe manage to hijack an SSH session that someone is making in order to pivot to another machine, compromise an over-permissive user, and then basically reach an EC2 with a strong role attached that actually does have permissions to actually connect to that database with the important data. So the important thing to remember that is an attack path, and basically attacks are not a single step actions. Attackers are chaining different events in order to actually reach those critical assets. Think about like when you're doing a red team exercise, a penetration testing exercise, things of that nature. They're actually going and looking at your environment and chaining those various issues together. Now, when you understand that, that's one thing, and that really helps understanding, okay, what is the impact? What is the impact of this vulnerability? So this vulnerability is not on an important machine, but from that, there is an escalation path all the way to the critical assets. So that's the first thing to understand. But it's not just about one attack path. Otherwise, we won't call it attack path management. We'll just say an attack path. But when you're looking at an attack path management, you're looking at the entire graph of potential ways an attacker can actually pivot. And that really enables us to do a lot of more interesting things like measure risk more effectively. So think about it that way. Let's assume that we have this small enterprise environment, and it works either in the enterprise or in the cloud. The concept of attack path is the same. We have one business unit here, we have some administrators here, and here are the critical assets that we have, and there might be in our cloud. So basically, attack path is actually starting an understanding. Let's assume an attacker would actually be able to penetrate a few random workstations, or maybe expose the publicly exposed EC2s, whatever. Where can it actually pivot from those onwards and onwards and onwards until we actually manage to reach the critical assets? Now, each one of those steps is an issue. So some of them might be actually vulnerabilities that I have. Maybe I know them from my vulnerability management solution. But a key thing to remember is this vulnerability actually exploited on that machine, and can you actually pivot from that place to another place? Now, some of those would be chained up and would be credential management problems. You have cached credentials on the machines, you have access keys, you have various things, and attackers are actually chaining them. But only when we're actually looking at it as a complete graph, we're connecting them together, we can start understanding things such as choke points. So what are choke points? Choke points are basically convergent points in the graph. So we need to understand that remediating all of those issues that we have in the environment is really not feasible. How many of you have vulnerability management teams that have actually finished patching everything they need or fixed all the issues that your CSPM showed you? No point. It's never going to happen. We've done a research and we analyzed and we've seen that 80% of the issues that you have, the exposures that exist in your environments, are actually not creating attack path towards the critical assets. Those are waste of time, things that you remediate that don't help you at all. And the idea is that you want to look at it in a graph and find those key places, those key choke points that have the convergence. Now, if you only fix those two, you're actually closing the most attack paths. So the idea is you want to find the most effective remediations, the places that you fix the least with least effort and gain the biggest benefit. So that's the first thing about looking at it in a complete graph, and that's why it's attack path management and not just a single attack path. So you understand the concept of choke points, and now you can actually start doing a lot of more interesting things. So we started by prioritizing the remediations, but we can also measure the risk. So we're now looking, and the business is asking us, the executives, they're asking, well, can someone reach my PCI data? Can someone reach this critical database? And it's not about how many vulnerabilities I have on that database, it's how many attack paths do I actually have and how complex. Now that helps us estimate how difficult it will be for an attacker to actually reach those sets of critical assets. So this is the main thing about attack path management. It's understanding the risk towards the business critical assets and understanding how to remediate it in the most cost-effective manner, because we're not going to remediate and fix everything. So we need to understand this actually looks like in real larger environments. So in the environments, you obviously need to remember you have our on-prem environments, we have our DMZ, we have our cloud accounts, and how it all connected and understanding it in a visual manner. So the visual representation is really key to actually help explain what are the issues. And another important piece here is the on-prem part, is the corporate network. Because still, if we look at attacks, most attacks still start with phishing. They don't start with, we just randomly landed inside your cloud account. Someone sent the phishing email, someone clicked on it, someone start pivoting until they reach that one person from DevOps that have the access keys on his machine, and then they continue to pivot towards the cloud environment. So it's important to understand the relationship between the on-prem environment and the cloud environment. So common examples that we've actually seen, so just to help explain and give some, to help make it more real. So this is an example, an Azure example. We're in an AWS conference, but we can still say Microsoft. So basically here we've actually was very, very cool in the fact that we started from a random workstation, someone from marketing, and due to domain credential issues, we were able to pivot to someone from the DevOps. On his machine, we've actually found Azure Access Token that would allow us to pivot to the cloud. In the cloud, we have actually pivoted until we were able to compromise the Intune admin. Now, once you have the Intune admin, you were able to actually pivot all the way back to servers in the on-prem data center. So this is just a cool example of how there is a relationship between your cloud environment and the on-prem environment, and attackers are actually pivoting from both sides. So that's one example. Another example, which is actually very, very common, which we've seen, people actually allow third parties to connect to their environments. You give them a role. How many of the vendors that you've seen here ask you, hey, provide me this security audit role, and maybe just a few more permissions. I need to take snapshots and give me some access to your encryption keys, and we'll be fine. And then you forget about it. And then attackers are actually compromising those a year later when you actually forget about it, and you don't understand why your environment was breached. So sometimes those are actually very strong permissions that are given, and we need to understand what is the impact. I gave this company here access to my environment. What can it actually cause? So those are different types of attack paths that we need to analyze and understand. Now, another common issue is what we call chaining of misconfigurations. And really, we don't need to call it misconfigurations. In reality, those are actual configurations that are done legitimately. So in this example, and this is from a large bank that we work with, basically they had two parts of an issue. So first they had an ability that they gave to all of their developers to basically modify a Lambda function in their environment. And that Lambda function can basically assume different roles, and that was legitimate. That's what Lambda functions are supposed to do. You pass a role to them when you create them, and so forth. On the other side, they had also an approved strong role that was used for maintenance, that basically using Systems Manager was able to execute code on various environments. What they didn't realize is that actually a developer can now modify the Lambda function to actually assume that strong maintenance role and basically create an escalations path all the way towards the critical assets. So basically, any developer has access to all of the production EC2s and can execute code on them, and that was unintended. So all the first steps were actually intended. They were not misconfigurations, they were intended and they were approved by the security team, but understanding the bigger context of it actually create the exposure that helped them realize it and fix that issue. So those are just a few common examples. And out of that, we can actually understand that attack paths are actually helping us measure, discover those issues, and fix them in a continuous manner. So basically, the idea is to start understanding what is our strategy, what are we actually trying to protect, what is important for the business. We can understand the visibility. This is my environment, this is how it looks like. Those are the different attack paths. This is how an attacker, understanding the mindset of the attacker and how he looks at our environment, which is crucial. And you do it on basically trying to help you understand the various contexts of various things. There's a lot of buttons in this slide. Marketing asked me to put it, and now I'm trying to figure out all the different steps around it. But basically, the main idea is that you need to understand all of the issues, how they relate towards the critical assets, and based on that, you can actually prioritize the most important things to resolve and do it in a continuous manner in an ongoing process. So it's not about trying to fix everything at once, it's fixing things one step at a time, fixing those main choke points in a continuous ongoing effort. Basically, how many of us have actually called the red team exercise, the red teamers came, they gave us a beautiful report, 6 months later, they came again, and well, you know what a good red teamer would do the first time he returns? He will open the previous reports and try to do the same thing over again. And most of the time, maybe someone fixed one small thing. The idea is not to try to tackle big projects, fix everything in your environment. The idea is to do it in an agile manner. Come and fix small things every day, this one vulnerability, this one misconfiguration, this one credential management issue, and do it in a continuous manner. And with that, we can actually see beautiful improvements in the security postures of organizations. So with that, I will wrap up, and if there's any questions, we can actually go and... How much time did I have? I have like 5 minutes left, so it's good. Any questions? No. Amazing. I hope you've learned. We're XM Cyber. We're at the booth right over there, so feel free to pop by and ask us if you want more details and if you want to hear more about the attack path and how we can help you secure both your on-prem and your cloud environments and the connection between those two environments. Thank you very much.